they may not have a badge, they have reached fairly high level of quality in their operations. And this is something that probably differentiates. Even in comparison with the global and regional peers, they probably are far ahead in terms of quality initiatives here in India. When it comes to visibility, many of them, you can see the bar chart to the yellow bars, many of them are not so happy with the kind of visibility they have in their organizations of what happens in their supply chains. There are some reasons which I'll come to a little later. It's not to say that all companies in India are bad. There are exceptions to this, of course. Examples like Marico was making a presentation some time back, and they were saying that we stopped all these schemes on products unless it's cleared by a supply chain executive, because what invariably happened when a scheme was thrown at the dealers was there was a spurt in demand, and it created a bullwhip effect right through the supply chain, and the cost of actually servicing that spurt in demand was far more than what they sort of attempted to achieve by way of sale. So they said no more schemes around Diwali or Christmas. It has to be approved by a supply chain executive, which normally was in the domain of a marketing and a salesperson. So there are good complexity master kind of companies which are able to do this, but by and large there seems to be a problem of visibility. Customer collaboration is fairly low. They're not talking to their customers about inventory replenishment, which is showing up in a number of sectors. Automotive is probably not so bad because the inventory turns are probably better than the global peers. But in a number of sectors, the way in which they manage inventory is not so efficient, particularly considering the fact there that most of the companies that are in the database are not complex companies. It's not as if they operate in 20 or 30 locations. Many of them operate in 2 or 3 countries and so forth. So the extent to which they collaborate with customers is quite poor. But again, there are exceptions to this. SRF, they have a tire cord division. And one of the things they tried to do was to look at their inventory, for which they looked at their number of line items, SKUs. And what they did was to go with their, the product list to their customers and said, look, we don't see sense in making so many products. We would like to cut it down, but you have to tell us if you would live with a little less number of products. If you choose a little less number of products, and I'll tell you where we are not making profits on certain products, wherever we are going to save some money, I'm willing to share 50% of that with you for the next 3 years or something like that. And they had a dramatic 40% decrease in the number of SKUs in their company, and they made a lot of money out of that. So there are companies which are collaborating with customers and seeing a great amount of value, but what is coming out is that across the board, an average company doesn't seem to be talking adequately to its customers. Similarly, we are not talking enough to the suppliers. What is also happening quite visibly is companies are not investing in capacity and fixed assets in any big way. There is another slide which probably go back here. This is not a very conclusive kind of an analysis. We just try to see if the rate of growth of depreciation follows the rate of growth of sale. This is not conclusive, but is it suggesting that we are sort of flogging the existing assets? Are we building enough capacity for the future? We try to sort of validate this by talking to the companies that participated in this. And many of them said, particularly in the automotive sector, they said, look, the kind of margins that we operate with are so thin that I cannot afford to take on any more costs, financial, the interest costs, depreciation costs. So I have no choice but to flog my fixed assets as of now. So given the fact that everybody is talking about, Jeff too was talking about $1 billion to be bought from India by way of auto components, and somebody else was talking about $1 billion. There are $5 or $6 billion of opportunity sitting for the auto component companies, and they are not investing in their plant and machinery. So what are they going to be doing? Are they going to be looking away from this opportunity, or is there a great way by which they are going to take advantage of this? I somehow cannot believe that that entire growth is going to come out of outsourcing. You cannot outsource engine components beyond a point. And I cannot again imagine that all this is hidden under lease rentals. I mean, it's unlikely to be happening. Therefore, are Indian companies sort of cannibalizing the future growth because they want to play to the market today? Again, the fourth dimension where the complexity masters are different from the others is the extent to which they adopt technology. Consistently, this is what Udayan was saying yesterday, consistently Indian companies seem to be fairly low in adopting technology. Very interestingly, one of the companies that participated in this, Deming company, is now thinking of implementing SAP for the first time. They don't have an ERP in their company. They're probably getting away with this because to a large extent many of these are fairly simple three factory kind of companies, but if they have to be complex, if they have to be setting up shop in other parts of the world, will they be able to manage their affairs if they don't adopt technology in any manner? While the yellow bar seems to be reaching up to the gray bar, what has to be understood is in the ERP segment, what has to be understood is when people say ERP, they don't necessarily talk about a package solution. They don't necessarily talk about formal application. In some cases, they have said, look, I have the accounts running in COBOL, I have receivables running in something, payrolls running in FoxPro and so forth. So while in a very general way, you can say it takes care of the enterprise bookkeeping, it is not enterprise information processing. They just ensure that at the end of the month, the books are balanced. So there is another study which I came across by, I think, Express Computers, which talks about the average ERP penetration in India being something like 35%. Manufacturing is somewhere between 40 and 50%. So there is a fair amount of work for Indian organizations, manufacturing organizations, to do in terms of adopting technology. This is an area where there is a lot of weakness. And forget about things like PDM, PLM, where definitely there is a lot more work. And again, the supply chain integration packages, I think I2 has probably sold 8 clients or 10 clients. Someone a little bigger than that has probably made something like 10 or 12 sale. So the number of installations that you find in India of beyond ERP is not too many. We are fairly behind in R&D. We are not spending adequately. Again, if you look at 1%, 1.5% of what brings in a new dimension. As it is, we are talking about sizes of anywhere between, let's say, 100, 150 crores to something like a couple of thousand crores. That's what we have in our database just now. So 1% of that is not a great deal. And this is where all the costs relating to foreign travel and attending seminars get booked. So real R&D work that goes on in companies as to what size and so on is something that we have to talk about. And even in the next 3 years, companies are not talking a great deal about pushing this up in any big way. On the one hand, people are saying in this next 6 years, something like 70% of the products and technologies that we use is going to be obsolete, and we don't seem to be thinking along those lines. To conclude, there are some disconnects between strategy that companies are sort of articulating and what they're doing within their firms. Two is there seems to be a difference between how global companies look at their future and growth vis-a-vis how Indian companies look at their future and growth. And in a number of cases, Indian organizations seem to be too focused on what's happening within the four walls of their companies rather than collaborate with their suppliers and customers, they're probably not spending enough money in IT. Resulting from all this is a danger that we would end up playing the cost arbitrage game. This is something the IT industry went through from, let's say, 85 till mid-90s or so, when it was just body shopping, and the only advantage you brought to the table was you're paying less by way of salary. In the last 5 years, the Infosys and TCSs have started talking about innovation and moving up the food chain. Are we going to be doing this, reinventing the whole wheel by getting in at a very low level, playing the cost game, not innovating adequately, and then 5 years, 6 years down the line, say that, look, I think we have to be innovating, when it's going to be a little more difficult to do all those things? Thank you very much.
Marketing, sales, engineering, R&D, sourcing, and all other aspects. I was surprised on the engineering and R&D side also. We are 0.5% of what China is holding from MNCs who want to invest into China. But I'm just looking at the perspective of, if you look at firms which have got a Deming quality certification, and I don't know how many of Chinese firms have that, but most of the Indian firms have it. But Indian firms have that Deming quality, but global companies wants to go to China. That means quality is an aspect, or how do you view for that? I hope I got the question through.
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
I mean, I don't think I have a great answer for this, but I'll put in my 2 bits worth. When you say there are 12 companies in India which have Deming, it doesn't mean the other companies are not good enough in terms of quality. It's just that these are slightly better and they carry a badge. So beyond a point, for some operations, it may not be so necessary for the companies to, there is always a trade-off, you know. And if the consumption is taking place in China, why would they want to set up operations in India? So I know this is not all that you're looking for, but
you know, this concluding remark that you made, that in spite of knowing the 10 years history of the IT industry, we are still again reinventing the wheel and starting with the cost. So to what do you ascribe this, you know, in spite of knowing we are not doing, this knowing-doing gap, to what do you ascribe it? Is there an economic rationale to this, or is it some cultural rationale to this? And secondly, do you know of any country where actually they did not start with cost arbitrage as a globalization drive, but actually straight away focused on innovation, and that drove their global foray?
one advantage of being a researcher is you can always point a finger at someone and say you went wrong, but that doesn't mean necessarily I have an answer for this. But it's a very rhetorical question. I mean, at the end of it, it appears to be that we are playing the cost arbitrage game, and the real comparison that we can make in India is that we have gone through this route with the IT. I mean, therefore, could we not do something a little better? But if you want to bring this whole discussion down to a firm level, I mean, I have some experience working with companies in India in the last 18, 19 years or so. One of the problems that Indian companies have is the promoter has to have a majority stake. This 51% is a big magic number that all of us have. So that results in two problems. One is there is only so much a promoter can keep throwing into the company, and that automatically restricts the size of the company. And as I was showing in one of the other slides, if 51% of this equity of a company sits in India, you have to service it at 12%, which is also an issue that we have to contend with. The second issue, I think, which everybody is talking about these days is what is the promoter's interest vis-a-vis the company's interest. I can give you, I mean, arising out of this GPS, we have been talking to companies, and we've been saying that, look, you are a little uncompetitive by cost because you have a factory in a particular location, let's say Coimbatore. And it so happens that the promoter's family is from Coimbatore. He says, not in my lifetime will I think of moving this. I mean, I'm so used to this place. And this is probably not the best place to have it. Therefore, is there a conflict between what the promoter wants to do and what, Coimbatore is an example, it could be Timbuktu for all you care. But there is this conflict between what is good for the company and what is good or interesting or acceptable to the promoter. Thank you.